In Paul Thomas Anderson's 2002 film Punch Drunk Love, dreamy animations by the video artist Jeremy Blake punctuate the narrative in a series of abstract interludes. Double Shuffle, a duo show featuring the work of painters Victoria Morton and Merlin James at Dublin's Kerlin gallery, neatly inverts this rhythm, with large passages of abstract reverie punctuated by small moments of sharpness and clarity. We move from Morton's large-scale, diaphanous abstracts which dominate the space to smaller works by both artists, works which can equally shift between abstraction and figuration but which have the contained, compressed energy that comes with a smaller format. The two exceptions to this rule, Morton's Scoring for Vision and James's Landing, bookend the show at opposite ends of the gallery. They are the most uncharacteristic works from each artist. Both are large, almost blunt pictures with an emphasis on pictorial design over painterly intrigue. James's Landing depicts the artist's home in a surprisingly straightforward, almost functional manner. It appears to have been squared up from a drawing, which it still has the look of. In some ways, it recalls the strangely cheering, slightly illustrational backgrounds of Francis Bacon's later work, all door fittings and light fixtures. Maybe it's the tangerine Gretsch orange of the Adrian Morris painting quoted on the back wall which pushes us towards Bacon. Yet the picture also implicitly asks us to question, like Bacon, like Morris, the nature of bodies in rooms, of bodies as rooms. There's a kind of wan flesh tint to it and a variousness of texture hard to see in reproduction or to spot from a distance, making the room itself a kind of body, a living, breathing, animate thing. But in place of Bacon's writhing figures, we only find a tiny fingernail-sized portrait of what we assume to be James and Morton in a framed photo on a dresser. So small, it's on the verge of unreadability. Standing before a set of doors which open onto a space that's neither here nor there, up nor down, Landing is in many ways about how we occupy and identify with other people's homes and lives, their relative accessibility or inaccessibility, just as a wider theme of the show is the relative accessibility of paintings. On the other side of the space, Morton's Scoring for Vision begins with Kenneth Noland-like chevrons which start to run into one another or veer off in very un-Noland ways. A series of symbols appear against the sticky, violet ground. They look like redesigned treble clefs or tuning forks or F-holes. Within the terms of Morton's painting, the image is strangely authoritarian, strict, its shapes evocative of military band stripes and tassels, but then the symbols dislodge themselves, becoming like stringy, amoeboid figures. The two at the bottom right look almost like a painter and model on either side of a canvas, recalling Picasso's wriggly pictures of the subject from the late 1920s. One is blue, one is pink, one is more rigid, one is more fluid, but aside from outmoded gender and colour coding, it's not clear which could be which. They dance around a rectangle, trading places. It's a relationship reflected in James's Artist, in which a cutout figure of Morton, holding a real paintbrush which has been collaged in, appears to be observing and painting us, you, me, the viewer. Our vantage here is that of one of Morton's paintings. We are being made by her, brought into being through her act of painting and picturing, but she's equally bringing herself into being, drawing a rectangle around her, defining an autonomous space in which to exist. At the same time, the image sits behind some kind of perspex, meaning it's impossible to look at without both your own reflection and the works on the opposite wall being captured and distorted, the perspex squeezed slightly by the bent stretcher bars at top and bottom. Artist risks a certain kind of cheesiness, but that risk gives the picture's devil-may-care inroads into reality a compelling frankness. It also makes you double back, question whether scoring for Vision's figures are artist and model, or artist and viewer. Both painters consistently raise the question of the viewer and their inhabitation of, their access to, and complicity in completing the paintings, versus the relative candour or guardedness of the artist. Showing together also encourages unavoidable speculation around the artist's personal relationship, something left discreetly ambiguous by the gallery communication. And perhaps it's also worth mentioning that artist is the lone inclusion from James's series of pictures, both of archetypal painter figures and of a figure resembling Morton specifically. Which, in terms of recurring colour characteristics, one can't help but recall Morton's Chimes, a picture which can suggest a book on a table, a sleeping head on a desk, or the panels of James's artist folding back on themselves. It's almost a cliché by now to call James an elusive artist, but here Morton is more often the trickier one to pin down. Chimes, particularly, never stops being baffling, maddeningly difficult to process even as you look at it, yet always opening up rather than shutting down. The four cardinal points of the show are completed by Morton's treetop and James's place on the opposite wall, two similarly sized pictures hung bracingly close to one another, one almost becoming the other. What could be a branch in the first picture reaches over to become dense foliage in the next. L-shapes along their edges and warm greyish clusters in the centres mirror image each other along a central symmetry line. Hung at this crucial fourth coordinate, they reach a point of high tension, with a risky attentional flip required in moving from Morton's dispersed liquidity to James's brittle density, one in lush oils, the other covered in clumps of real hair. It's the clearest position from which to compare one artist to the other, and yet, for all their differences, it shows how ultimately reconcilable apparently divergent practices can be. It's painting as a spectrum of activity, where one work can reflect and refract how we see another, where one work can open up another, or pull it in a different direction. And if this is true between the two artists, it's equally true within their individual bodies of work. Both painters here are contrarian. James famously, Morton increasingly so. Each has a tendency to address themes and qualities in one work only to remix and readdress them in dramatically oppositional scale and approach in another. Morton, who is also a musician, often investigates a kind of musical attention. Most obviously here in About Listening, a huge enveloping work in four major movements, split by an implied cross structure, which then dissolve into areas we could think of as melody, ornamentation, and improvisation. They flow into one another the closer you get, the larger structure being subsumed into the moment. It's a big picture about something small and intimate, listening. But then Morton can also shrink down and make a relatively tiny picture about something vast, panoramic. Cycle Route is a small picture of acidic intensity. There's a sliver of startlingly illusionistic sky, the suggestion of sand on tarmac, what could be a doll-like girl's head in the foreground. It's on very rough linen, giving it the gritty, rough-cast sunlight of the outdoors. Seen along with About Listening, Cycle Route suggests a correlation between audio and pictorial attention, while its very particular merging of abstracted and represented experience, like the wider presentation that it's part of, provokes something close to pure joy. There's a Luc Tuymans painting of Bob Ross that's very popular at the moment. This is painting about as far away as you can get from that picture's cynicism, even if it deals with many of the same ideas of painters and viewers and their mediated relationship. carried out either side of a screen. The figure of Ross drowns in an inky black nowhere, his back to the viewer in the shrinking universe of a darkened TV studio. The image is just there on the surface, there's no point of entry. Victoria Morton and Merlin James are painters still punch drunk in love with their art form. And for all that they withhold, they leave the doors open.